Some people are learned, some people are creative, some are influential in world affairs, and a select minority of people might even be classified as prodigies. Very few people combine all of these different assets into a single person, such as the person we're honoring today. At the age of 3, when most people are trying mightily not to relapse into thumb-sucking or bedwetting, Paderewski began studying the piano. At the age of 12, he entered the conservatory in Warsaw to further his studies. At the age of 18, he began teaching at the conservatory in Warsaw. From there, he went on to Berlin to study composition, and then to Vienna to further his skills. In 1887, he made his public debut, rapidly becoming so popular that within 2 years he was performing in Paris, London, and the United States. By the early 1890s, his talents were widely acclaimed as he reached a pinnacle of international success rarely enjoyed by anyone, much less someone of his young age. Tours of South America, South Africa, Australia, and New Zealand followed. Beyond his performances, however, Paderewski also proved to be a talented composer, despite dedicating only a very small portion of his time to that effort. Among his compositions were a symphony, a violin and piano sonata, many pieces for the piano, which often incorporated Polish dance rhythms, and the opera Monroe, which premiered in Dresden in 1901 and opened in New York's Metropolitan Opera in the following year. It remains the only opera written by a Pole to be performed at New York's Metropolitan Opera. In the following year, 1902, while his opera was being performed, Paderewski performed in person a few blocks away at Carnegie Hall, the first person to have not a solo performance, but the first person to be the only person on a particular playbill at Carnegie Hall. Newspapers at the time reported overflow crowds at both venues. Despite his rigorous schedule of worldwide tours, early in his life he developed an active interest in philanthropy, where his generosity provided support for other musicians and composers, as well as humanitarian relief. In 1895, he established the Paderewski Fund in New York to support a prize competition for American composers on the condition that those selected be selected without regard to race or religion. 3 years later, he founded a similar fund in Leipzig, and in the following year, a fund in London to provide for widows and orphans from the fighting in Transvaal. In 1910, his efforts funded a monument in Krakow to commemorate the 500th anniversary of the Battle of Grunwald. Paderewski settled in Paso Robles, California in 1913, but did not have very much time to enjoy his newfound time of leisure before the outbreak of the First World War. As soon as World War I began, he rushed to Europe, where he took a leading part in the National Committee in Paris and became a leading spokesman for that organization once it was recognized as the official voice of Poland. Using his status as an international celebrity, he launched an aggressive campaign to publicize the plight of war-torn Poland, gain humanitarian aid for the nation, and began creating international political alliances to support the necessity of eventual Polish independence. Returning to the United States, he worked tirelessly speaking on behalf of Polish independence and holding benefit concerts for Polish war relief. He supported the creation of a Polish army in France from among volunteers in the United States and Canada, and was recognized as the official Polish representative to the United States. It is an unfortunate attribute of our Polish-American community that we often spend too much time fighting among ourselves and not enough time uniting. And I think one of the things that Paderewski achieved, which is unfortunately often overlooked in view of his diplomatic efforts, is the way that he galvanized and unified American Polonia a very diverse and disparate group in support of the cause of Polish independence. Attesting to his leadership was a unique document bearing the signatures of representatives of all of the major Polish organizations in America, designating Paderewski as their official spokesperson on political affairs. As a further sign of the esteem in which he was held, every day at roll call in General Haller's army, every unit announced his name, and at the announcement of his name, every person in that unit said present in unison. As a popular international figure, Paderewski used his status to gain entree into political and financial circles where his vigorous lobbying was critical to the Polish cause. Largely through his efforts, Congress passed a resolution to support Poland, and President Woodrow Wilson proclaimed January 1st, 1916, as a day for donating to Polish war relief. On January 12, 1917, Paderewski submitted to the White House a memorandum on the reasons and rationale for Polish independence. 11 days later, Wilson made a public speech in which he recognized the necessity of, quote, a new Poland, and in which he said, quote, I take it for granted that statesmen everywhere are agreed that there should be a united, independent, autonomous Poland, end quote. No one was more instrumental in this effort than him. At the end of the war, the Big Four, Woodrow Wilson from the United States, of course, George Clemenceau of France, Vittorio Orlando of Italy, and David Lloyd George of Britain, signed a joint letter in which they offered an opinion of Paderewski's skills. They said, and I quote, no country could wish for a better advocate, end quote. At the end of the war, Paderewski assumed the role as leader of the Polish nation and represented it during the negotiations at the Paris Peace Conference. There he enjoyed the pleasure of signing the Treaty of Versailles on behalf of the newly independent homeland. Yet although he had done so much to set this in motion, political squabbling at home eventually led to his resignation as prime minister and accepting the post of Polish ambassador to the League of Nations. When he addressed the League in Geneva in 1920, he spoke for more than an hour with no notes in French. And then he spoke for another hour with no notes, translating what he had just said into English. He was the only speaker not to use an interpreter, and when he finished, the delegates gave him a standing ovation. In 1922, he retired from politics, and in the 1930s began devoting himself again to philanthropic work, making substantial contributions to unemployed musicians and playwrights during the Depression, providing money to rebuild a cathedral in Switzerland, supporting an Allied soldiers' home in France, and providing financial support to Jewish refugees in Paris. He made the single largest financial donation to an American Legion drive for disabled veterans, and he also commissioned a statue of Woodrow Wilson to be placed in Post 9 as a symbol of gratitude to the American president. He came out of retirement yet again to come to the aid of his homeland with the outbreak of World War II. He revived his World War I Polish Relief Agency, assumed the leadership of the Polish National Council of London in 1940, and resumed giving concerts, benefit concerts, to support Poland. Weakened, no doubt, from this rigorous pace, he contracted pneumonia and died in June of 1941. Truly a man for all seasons, Paderewski was universally recognized no less for his musical accomplishments than for his humanitarian and diplomatic efforts on behalf of his homeland. The American Secretary of State, Robert Lansing, who didn't like Paderewski. When he met him, he made several disparaging comments about this guy that didn't want to talk about anything besides Poland. Lansing later wrote, quote, what Mr. Paderewski has done for Poland will cause eternal gratitude. His career is one which deserves to be remembered not only by his countrymen, but by every man whose love of country and loyalty to a great cause stand forth as the noblest attributes of human character. In a 1934 biography, Charles Phillips wrote, "It is difficult to write of Paderewski without emotion. Statesman, orator, pianist, composer, he is a superlative man, and his genius transcends that of anyone I have ever known. Those of us who love Poland are glad that she can claim him as a son. But let her always remember that Ignacy Jan Paderewski belongs to all of mankind." Thus, it's fitting that this monument here be rededicated in the hope of not only honoring him, but of recalling and renewing the values that he so embodied.